Our first question is a bit about AI and how it can be used in drug discovery.
Yeah, no, I can jump into this. I think the short answer is in way more ways than we could possibly list on this call. I think it's important to remember is AI is a tool, right? It's a tool that allows us to take data, information, process this in such a way, and then make new inferences from it. And it could be used in a variety of different ways. It could be used to select patients in clinical trials. It could be used for chemical optimization, and we've already seen that being done a lot. And specifically, what I think the nature of our conversation and our partnership with Poolbeg is, and what we're excited about, is it can be used to discover new biology, right?
Mm.
What we can do is take the enormous amount of biology we know as kind of a society, take new data that's coming in, and kind of use computer programs, modeling, what we will just, I'll call AI for the rest of this conversation, to take that information and allow us to say, like, what are areas that we're not looking at, right? I like to always imagine, right, like, you're looking at this worldview, and there's areas where we as scientists have shined strong lights on, we know very well, and then there's dark spots. And what AI allows us to do is like traverse those dark spots and say, there's something over here that we haven't looked at that we think could be really relevant to the problem you're solving.
So I'll piggyback off that. I think AI has this ability to take massive amounts of data and really be able to make sense of it in a way that humans and researchers can't do just at scale like AI, and really explore it in an unbiased sense. And that's something that we've seen, and why we've seen AI become more and more prevalent over the past 15, 10, and especially like the last 5 years. We're getting a lot of very different data sets, some that we'll be talking about later, that are just now capable to really be used for discovery or for chemical generation, clinical trial design, really every single part of the pipeline of drug discovery and development.
And more specifically, so following on from that, OTB recently announced your new platform, ATLANTIS. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what impact that can have?
Yeah, no, certainly. So like I said, we as a company focus on what we have to say the earliest stages of biology, early stages of drug discovery, which is that discovery stage. So discovery, I'll do a little bit of background, right? Discovery, has traditionally been the realm of, I'd say, academia, right? It's a long process where scientists spend years or decades probing a pathway, a target, trying to find a link between some biology, some new biology, and disease. Now, our goal as a company is disease is expanding, right? Precision medicine is causing the need for discovery to happen at a rate much quicker than previous possible. So how can we use AI to do flat out discovery at scale? And Atlantis, what our platform is our platform that allows us to kind of tackle discovery problems in kind of a high throughput systematic manner. We call it Atlantis kind of as an homage, kind of the hidden city under the sea, because this idea that we're trying to find these hidden bits of discovery, these hidden insights from this kind of sea of data. So what we do is, it's a multi-step platform, and we won't go through every single step just for the sake of time here. But what it allows us to do is kind of take that data and systematically build our own sort of drug discovery fund, right? So take data, theoretically saying, let's say there's 20,000 possible targets for any given disease, right? You want to use this platform to kind of systematically create a funnel to filter that down. So saying, of those 20,000, maybe 1,000 are predicted to be safe. Of those 1,000, 500 are predicted to be druggable. Of those 500, 50 are predicted to actually be relevant in that certain disease, right? So by the end of this process, you have kind of a short list of things that you can go after in the lab, which is exactly kind of what we've been working on, what we've been excited to work on with the Poolbeg team here focused on RSV. I'll kind of give an example of, this is in the cancer space, but I think this kind of helped define where we see the Atlantis platform being useful. Is, for anyone interested in familiar with the oncology space, one of the biggest cancer targets is this protein or gene called KRAS, right? It's very well known that, if you're able to successfully drug KRAS, you can have a pretty outsized effect and treat a variety of different cancers. But right now, there are over 100 companies, and not even including academia, trying to build KRAS drugs, right? Some subset of those 100 companies are going to build successful KRAS drugs and have a great impact on patients. But at a certain point, we're going to be saturated about the number of companies working on KRAS drugs. So our goal at OneThree and what Atlantis is it's not to create a better KRAS drug, it's to find the next KRAS, right? And that's specifically what we've tried to do. How can we find and do discovery at scale and look at those areas that have been missed by traditional discovery, and have built a series of algorithms, data processes, and engineering infrastructure to allow us to do that in a high throughput manner.
And Neil, I'll probably just build on that a little bit, that, you know, that's what's so important to us at Poolbeg, because we have all of this data so we can see the disease biology and we can see what's going on. But there's so many steps between looking at data and developing a drug. You know, we look at the biology, we look at what's druggable, we look at what we can find compounds that work for, and the ability to integrate those multiple steps and contextualize them all at the same time is really what OneThree are bringing to us. So we have all this data, but when you have data, it's not always easy to know what to do next with it, and to be able to take into context that the drug discovery and what's novel, but also what we're doing at the moment is just critical for us.
And speaking about that drug discovery side of the AI and the influence it can have, how have you seen that influence evolve in the last few years, and where do you think it needs to go just to bring it that step further?
Yeah, so I think, you know what, as I said earlier, right, like I think AI is going to apply in a lot of different areas, right? And I think it started off being applied in more commercial facing areas, right? Clinical trial selection, you know, drug disease, you know, billing, things like that, right? We recently have seen, I'd say in the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of work in the AI for chemistry space, right? Some amazing companies out there trying to say, how can you improve chemical optimization? How can you improve lead optimization? How can you improve novel chemical generation using AI as kind of the crux to generate those hypotheses? But I would still argue that traditionally, and even now in most biotech and pharma companies, AI and any sort of computation is seen as a support service. And what I mean by that, it is used as a tool to validate or expand on pre-existing hypotheses, right? So someone will say, I believe this biology, right? I believe A, if you do A, B will happen. Here's some data. Can AI confirm or deny it? I think what we're incredibly excited about, both at OneThree, but also as an industry, specifically in this partnership, is not to expand on and validate existing hypotheses, but fundamentally be a driver of discovery, right? Can you use this to identify completely new hypotheses? Because I think that's where you break through the biases of how hypothesis generation is done. That's where you break through the biases of, like, you know, the same old thing, you know, the same old hypotheses, the same old ideas being tested over and over. So fundamentally, and like, you know, just I'm obviously a little bit biased, but I think, you know, what excites me most about discovery, the drug discovery, is that early stage discovery where those hypotheses are created. So we've seen the industry more and more understand that direction. I think this partnership is evidence of that. Like, I will argue 5 years ago, you wouldn't have seen partnerships like this, but I think that's only because of the field, the nature, the data, the technology that's evolving. I am very, very hopeful that 5 years from now, we will see far more partnerships in the industry, academic world like this, where you can use new technology as a driver of discovery. So that's something that's in my mind. I know Corey, Corey can give a far more, I'd say, technical answer, but at a high level, I think that's something that I'd be excited about.
Yes, Corey, we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so I think Neil's dead on in that where we're focusing AI has definitely begun to shift. It started really with first actually in the clinic, doctors using it, then slowly to clinical trial design. And we're kind of seeing it go further and further closer to true preclinical novel target discovery, which is, like we've said, where we really focus on. But something that I love about AI in general is that it's always evolving, because there's always going to be new technical advances in what kind of machine learning we can see. We've seen that a lot in the press recently. Additionally, the new data. I think every data scientist would say your machine learning is only as good as the data you're putting in. So the new data that's coming out, new sequencing data, new patient cohort sets that we're seeing, that's just enabling discovery and AI to be used in ways that it couldn't have even 6 months ago or a year ago. So that's something that I love, is that it's going to constantly be changing as we get better at everything surrounding it as well.
I think you've accelerated, and we can talk about the details later on, but you know, the novelty of our data that we inputted and you know, that Corey and the team can analyze has come out with some very interesting targets for RSV in particular, and we'll talk about that. But it's you know, it's just the speed, I think, is the key thing for us, and these are very novel, understanding the biology from a very deep data set. And from there, looking at as I said, new novel, you know, target signatures, and then ultimately drugs. So it's the acceleration of it all. I think it's fascinating, but built on, you know, very, you know, high quality data. And maybe Liam can talk about, you know, the challenge data that we passed over to OneThree and the benefits of that. I think it's a good story where it came from and how we're using it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think to your point, Neil, you know, you guys really are pioneers in this field, because if we look at AI in general, it's been so successful in finance, economics, logistics, where you have an existing process. There's no question that AI can drive efficiencies. The difference with what we're trying to do is we're trying to go with an open hypothesis, and we have all this data, but sometimes we don't know what the question we're trying to answer is. And, you know, that basically means that we have data, but we don't know the parameters that we're trying to analyze sometimes. And if I give the example of biological passports and doping, a blood sample from an athlete can't tell you if they're doping anymore, because you need to see what's happening over time. So we've realized there the parameters, the changes over time. So really what we're bringing in the challenge study is that we're defining more of disease, where there's loads of data available in the public sphere for infectious diseases, for COVID-19, for influenza, for RSV, but what they don't have is the holistic approach a lot of the time. So it can be in hospitalized patients where we can see what's going on in severe disease, but we don't often understand how they got there, or what the predominant drivers are, or the predictors are. So when we look at challenge study data, the advantage is that it comes with all of the information. So volunteers are admitted to quarantine, and they're kept for 2 days before they're inoculated with virus. And you know, that period is massively important, because it gives us the baseline that we can compare everything against. So everything that we use for our project isn't actually disease biology, it's normalized disease biology. So for every individual, we normalized it to their individual baseline. And without that, you know, the readings are just so diverse, and disease varies so much between all of us that it's really difficult to see the signals in it. So what we're able to bring is to help define this disease biology, and hopefully make the real breakthrough in this field of disease biology AI, where we're starting from a completely agnostic point, like Neil said, and trying to make really revolutionary breakthrough discoveries. And it is the quality of the data, as Corey mentioned, that if we can provide good quality, detailed data, you know, that is the basis. But, you know, AI is a complex field, and you know, that's the skills that OneThree brought to Poolbeg, where alone we have a lot of data, but OneThree really have the experience in this field. They know what the challenges are, and together we were able to work to bring it to something meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think, Jeremy, just to bring you in on this, how would you surmise why Poolbeg have leveraged AI for drug discovery and using OTB?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't want to say it's obvious, but we had this large data set, as when we spun out of HBevo. There's a question: what are we going to do with this? You know, it's a bit like, you know, we're mining to a certain degree. You know, we know there's something valuable in there, and how are we going to extract, you know, the diamonds, as it were, you know. And you know, we talked to a lot of AI companies, and you know, I think we hit it off, is one way to put it, with the team at OneThree. They had validation from their previous work around oncology. This is their, you know, first time moving into infectious diseases, and I think they were pleasantly surprised at the quality of the data. So we knew that this was the right, you know, partnership. You know, they're bringing their, you know, as I say, AI expertise, and we've got the data sets. And then it's up to us now, as I say, coming towards you know, this stage of our collaboration where we're identifying novel signatures and targets and drugs. You know, so then it's up to us as a, you know, biotech company to move those forward.
You know, one thing that always excited us was the uniqueness, but also, like I said, the quality of the data, right? As I think we've been mentioned, and other people before me have mentioned, right? AI is only as powerful as the data you bring in, right? And at OneThree, we are bringing in our database as well. But I think the utility, the power, cleanliness is not the right word, but cleanliness we saw.
We know what you mean. Yeah, and just to put it into context, additional context, Owen, you know, from a Poolbeg standpoint, we had access to this rich data set around RSV that we'll talk about, respiratory syncytial virus, influenza, and COVID as well. So we have this really rich. So RSV, you know, we put in the hands of OneThree, who's done very well. And, you know, it's a disease. It's funny in a post, you know, COVID world. I always hesitate to say post because it's around and it'll always be around. But we've learned a lot about, you know, viruses and viral infections. And RSV is an interesting one in that it's been there for many years. It really affects the very, very young and the very, very old. And the numbers are quite staggering in that there's like 64 million cases globally a year with 160,000 deaths. And it's kind of interesting where this is a normal year where, you know, people don't talk about it too much, you know, so there's crying out there for new medicines in that space. There's some positive, you know, data coming out for vaccines, but for those who are unfortunate enough to get the disease and are not vaccinated, there's nothing really out there for it. You know, there's a prophylactic antibody that they give to, again, typically very young kids, ages. And, you know, from that standpoint, though, if you get the infection and you're progressing and, you know, there's nothing out there for us. So we're hoping to identify, you know, programs, you know, in that space where we're able to kind of treat the disease. And for that case in point, there's nothing out there, for, you know, in that certain area. So we have a unique data set, a unique collaboration. We've got some very interesting, as I say, signatures and now drugs coming out the other end. So we're hoping to, you know, to build a program around developing treatments and therapies for RSV. And I think that to do it in essentially 12 months or, you know, slightly less than 12 months is quite remarkable what we've achieved so far. So very excited about that.
And I guess that's the update you're giving on your current research. So obviously it's been going quite well, Jeremy. What's the timescale, or what any other updates you can give us on that?
We're really excited at the moment. Obviously everybody's mentioned that the data was good and the analysis went really well. And now we're looking at really novel discoveries where we're bringing them into the lab to look to validate them further. And over the next 6 months or so, we're hoping to get real tangible feedback on whether or not we want to proceed with this further. And then, you know, that looks at, we might go back and look at further analysis of the data set. We're going to be looking at relevance to other diseases, because one of the big parts here for us is, as Jeremy mentioned, the only treatment for RSV is, you know, a monoclonal antibody, which is only given to very at-risk patients. The advantage we have is that we're looking at host biology, so the human biology of response, which means that we're not going to drive resistance to, or viral resistance in our treatments most likely. So we need to look at, are we combating the virus or are we combating the disease? And there's a real excitement there that we might be able to combat the disease rather than the virus for the first time.
Yeah. And I know we've kind of touched these points, but obviously you guys, it'd be great to get some kind of succinct answers on it, maybe from each of you, and then we can kind of build from each other's answers as well, about how this approach is different than what's currently out there in terms of the use of AI. I assume that is, or what you're doing for this RSV treatment. How is the approach different than maybe the classical traditional ways?
Yeah. Who wants to take that, guys? Because I think we can all contribute to that one.
Yeah. This is the meat in the sandwich, I think, isn't it?
It is. It's just the sorry, Neil, I know you're about to say, but it's just that kind of the base of the collaboration is like we both bring respective expertise, and obviously from a Poolbeg standpoint, we'll move it forward. But as Liam said, what's unique is the data set. What's the expertise that OneThree brings is unique as well. You know, taking and analyzing in their way. I think we spoke to a lot of AI companies, some of which you say, oh yeah, we can analyze that and come up with interesting targets. But OneThree takes that extra step or 2 or 3 to look for drugs then that hit that target. So that's what you want to be at the end. You want to have a drug, you want to have a medicine, you want to have something that kind of impacts the you know, that's RSV infection.
And I'll kind of piggyback on that a little and say, you know, the data, as we spoke about, was incredibly unique, right? And I think one thing we were excited about is, you know, just coming back, right? Like you don't really see that many AI discovery partnerships, right? You see a lot of, you know, I think recently you saw, like, I think it was Sanofi signed a deal with a company where it's like they come with a target, the AI company helps develop, right? So there's a lot of AI to accelerate development partnerships. We have always been really excited about AI for discovery, which is exactly what Jeremy said here, because it was fundamentally taking a disease area where there's a huge unmet need, right? Where the biology is still fundamentally not as well known as we would like it to be, right? Thinking about disease progression, disease onset, disease severity, all of those things. And, you know, I always joke to our team that we don't measure success in kind of dollars raised, partnership signed, candidates thing. At the end of the day, OneThree success and Poolbeg success, I think, and every company's success at the end of the day will be measured in, patients treated or patients' lives affected. And I say that not as kind of a grandiose statement, but more as the fact of saying that this idea you have to go soup to nuts is kind of the important thing, right? At the end of the day, you find a target, that target may not be able to be drugged, or you find a target without a clear mechanism, right? Like the ability to, what excited us is, one, the platform's ready to link it, but also Poolbeg's kind of expertise in going from that start to finish, right? Going from a disease where there's a huge unmet need into a drug that can actually be moved into the clinic.
Absolutely. And I think what's clever as well, I think when we, again, from a Poolbeg standpoint, part of our business model is to get human data as quickly as possible. So we are leveraging on existing drugs. And that was one of our kind of requests with Corey and the team, was that when you're looking for drugs that hit, that kind of impact the progression of the disease, look for drugs that have already been in humans, so we know that they're safe and well tolerated, but then we can kind of reposition them into the RSV space. So we're happy to see a number of those have come through. So you're right, Neil, we can accelerate into the clinic very quickly and generate that that key data. So you're right. There's a gap in the market, there's a gap for patients, and we're hoping to fill that very rapidly.
I think from my perspective, Jeremy, as well, one of the things I like to testify, obviously the data is completely unique, but one of the real skills that differentiates this program for me has been OneThree's focus on novel discoveries. So obviously the focus when we're doing disease analysis is to guide through the process, but sometimes we're introducing our biases into that process. But from day one, the team was very focused on how can we guide this properly to make sure that what we're looking at is really relevant to patients in hospital beds, but also how can we retain that level of novelty and the kind of unbiased approach that we're looking at novel discoveries rather than trudging along ground which already been marched on.
Yeah, and I can speak to the novelty was, like you said, important just from the jump, and we made sure to really collaborate with Poolbeg and touch on the expertise that they had in infectious disease, which I think was key to this partnership, because we were able to then take that information, and you can build a model, but if you don't know what you're trying to model for or what disease state you're actually trying to cure or treat, then it's a useless model. So being able to really talk to people that knew RSV inside and out and being able to build the models from that was key. And then I always like to say that when you run your model, you get your predictions, there's that moment of just pure terror, because you get these results and you're like, this makes no sense. I'm so confused. This is all wrong. And being able to kind of backtrack through our models, look what's in our database and talk with Poolbeg and say, wow, these actually make a lot of sense. They're just new and people really have been overlooking them. But this has a lot of ground in the biology of RSV and a lot of potential to really go to patients sooner rather than later.
Great. Yeah. I mean, we like to say we're starting with patients. I mean, these are healthy volunteers who've been through the viral challenge. So these are patients who were healthy, they became sick, they recovered. So you're kind of tracking the disease. So you're working your way backwards from patients to patients. And as we said, we're looking for drugs that have already been in humans for different purposes that are safe and well tolerated. So we see there's an excellent gap. But we're following the science, we're pushing the science, we're working backwards from the science. So we're doing it's like a 360, I guess. But we're understanding the disease progression and then looking for drugs to treat them in the field, in patients in the future.
Oh, very interesting indeed. And guys, I suppose looking at the broader environment across for example, similar AI providers to yourselves, has there been any recent news, recent updates that have taken you by surprise, or that you're quite interested in, or that you feel should be mentioned?
Yeah, no, I can speak on just like on the kind of just the AI tech side, right? Like as I said, I think it's hard to argue. I think recently it's become harder and harder to argue with the use of AI in chemistry, right? I would say 5 years ago, it was an unknown field. People weren't sure how useful it would be. And I think you've seen companies like Cyclica, Atomize, Exscientia, right? Like companies that have, I think, shown with, I don't know, you never know full certainty until you get an approved drug, but with reasonable validation that AI can improve and advance the chemical generation and chemical optimization process. And, I will just say, frankly, even as a company, right, as, OneThree, in addition to our partnership with Poolbeg and others, right, we're advancing an internal pipeline of novel targets coming out of the platform, we're partnering with companies like that because we've seen the power that coming that in can provide. So I think that's an area that I've always been excited to see kind of more advancements in. I think it's showing how. I also think it's exciting. One thing I always joke is, I think the worst thing that happens for AI in drug discovery is the people who say AI is going to fix drug discovery. It's not. It's a complicated problem. It's a complicated process.
Yeah.
AI is a tool. It needs to be applied in smart ways. So I am very excited to see kind of not these large scale, like AI is going to fix everything type of press releases, but very, very concrete. AI solved this very distinct concrete problem. And chemistry is just an area I've seen a lot happen recently. I, of course, I'm hopeful that in the next couple months to year, we'll have some very exciting press releases come out of the OneThree Poolbeg collaboration that other people in other roundtables will be talking about how it's now beginning to affect the discovery space. So that's one area. I think, I'll let the other people speak, but that's not to say that there hasn't been a ton of work. I think we've seen a lot of interesting work in the data generation space, data collection space, clinical trial space. But that's particularly, to me, focusing on the early stage of drug discovery. I'm just always very excited to see that chemistry and discovery movement.
Yeah.
Anyone else had anything to add? If not, I had another question maybe for Neil or Corey specifically just on that. So you're kind of speaking of people think the idea that people shouldn't be thinking, AI is going to cure everything. I'm sure there's been also some people that have said, there's always with any new advancement, people saying, it's not as efficient as some other ways. How have you found that kind of pushback perhaps, and how have you tried to win over people to explain and bring them on board? I'm quite interested to hear that myself.
Yeah, of course. So I think that one of the key evolutions within AI that has, especially in drug discovery and development, that I've seen is this willingness to collaborate and this true cross-discipline between machine learning scientists and biologists that I think at the very beginning, it was still two completely different worlds. And now it slowly is merging into one world. And now people are speaking the same language. I think that the general ML literacy is also rising. So it's much easier to say, we used an ensemble model, and people aren't just looking at you with question marks and kind of understanding where people are coming from on both ends. But at the end of the day, the only way that these predictions or models are going to be useful, like I said before, is going to be if they're actually directed at the right disease question. So I do believe that this idea of interpretability, understanding what the model is actually predicting, and collaboration from the beginning with the disease experts is really how people are starting to view it and what's becoming the dominant form of AI in drug discovery.
Yeah.
And I'll piggyback off that by kind of leaning on, I think, an old English phrase, which is the proof is in the pudding, right? At the end of the day, every technology is a technology, has unlimited hope and unlimited skepticism until it's proven, right? And I will argue, and I'll be the first to say, I don't think AI, proof in drug discovery is an approved drug. And I do not believe we have seen any AI-generated drug go nearly that far. So I think we're still a ways away. But partnerships like this, I think, is what convinces the industry, right? I'm excited about this, not just as an fact of it can improve outcomes for OneThree, Poolbeg, and patients with RSV, but I think partnerships like this will be kind of cornerstones that the industry looks to kind of down the road, right? Showing success in this is what people can go to and say, hey, it actually works. It's not just this pie in the sky technology that people will promise me and do it. And, I'm also speaking from a little bit of, a founder perspective, which is, at a certain point, you're always pushed by investors to kind of make these big claims. And I think one thing that's we really focus on, and one thing I'm really excited about this and other partnerships is, we don't have to go and say AI is going to fix everything, it's going to cure all these things. We can kind of say hey, this is a problem that normally would have taken years, right? It normally would have taken years to start with an unknown data set with a disease with unmet need, find targets, find compounds, move those into testing. It happened in about a year, right? And honestly, I think in the future, it could go quicker, right? It could be more efficient, right? That's, I think, what excites us. I think, when we were first talking to Poolbeg, I think we were able to come back with our proof of concepts. I think going forward, this is going to be something that the industry looks to. And I'm excited about, not just this partnership, I'm excited about a year from now when we see some other company trying to work and build out an AI team into some other disease, their CEO is saying, remember that OneThree Poolbeg result we saw last year? Like, clearly it's doing it. We need to do more of this too.
Yeah. I think you're right, Neil. I think the proof of the pudding is a good way to describe it. And the number of deals that pharma have done in the AI space in the last several years has been quite remarkable, and it's accelerating. They're spending big money, real money. To Corey's point, I think the biologists are now talking to the machine, the bioinformaticians and the machine learners, and they're actually kind of cross-pollinating. They see the value of collaborating. I mean, science is based on collaboration, but then pharma are willing to kind of spend big money to push these forward. So there's always been, as I say, a critique of the industry is the productivity is quite low. The return on the investment, is the numbers of failures, and I think this will significantly decrease the number of failures because, again, applying, I guess it's more rigorous analysis to the biology that has been done in the past. Kind of you'll cut out those kind of cul-de-sacs, those dead ends, and hopefully you'll have better outcomes in the future when it comes to again ultimately getting drugs approved. And that's the end of the day, getting the drugs approved and treating patients. So I think pharma are kind of dipped their toe in the water, but now I think they're running full steam, into the sea.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, incorporation of AI is either down to increased understanding or it being validated. But we're still working in pharma, and a drug still has to go through phase 1, 2, 3 trials. So it takes time for that validation to come. And some people do need the proof is in the pudding concept to get on board. But I guess we're seeing it now with Google bringing out their chatbot in response to ChatGPT having a lot of interaction. It takes time to build these models. One of the biggest attractions we had to OneThree was that they spent years developing their machine before we got involved, and it was a massively important and valuable structure that we could interact with. But if we were to start that from scratch, it takes years, potentially decades, to build these machines properly, and it takes the clinical input, the scientific input, the data scientists to all come together. So we're sitting in a position where we've a major advantage in this industry already, because we're early adopters. So we're already seeing the successes. We're already in the lab, and as much as Poolbeg are going to do well, OneThree are also getting validation of their platforms, and we're really excited for how this is going to go, because even small amounts of success over the next 6 months are going to be symbolic of much bigger things to come.
Yeah, and you've mentioned the next 6 months, and you've mentioned the new collaboration. These words. What's next for you guys? What's the next 6 months hold, or what is the future for you guys? Where do you see it going?
I think Liam will be very busy.
Yeah, look, from our perspective, we've loved working with OneThree. It's been really insightful for us. We've no criticisms at this stage, and it's great to come out of a collaborative research program like this, because there always is pressures, to make things happen fast and to have all parties engaged with the same concepts that we bring through. But we've nothing but praise for how we've got in here. We're excited to go into the lab. We're excited of what's going to come out in the next 6 months, and by all means, if we have success, which we expect, it's not going to be the end of the road.
I think that a lot of people think of AI and pharma partnerships as, okay, AI has printed the report and we're done. No, definitely not. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to. Also being busy with Liam the next few months, and really focusing on going back into the engine, maybe looking at some results that are coming out from those validation studies, and again, just feeding it through the engine and having a better idea holistically of what we're looking at.